What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty Shannon White here with another episode of the Steelers Global Perspective. Now, Shannon, there are two blokes that we've talked about a lot this offseason since the draft in Zach Frazier at center out of West Virginia and Beanie Bishop out of West Virginia. Now, you and I are recording this transparently for everyone before the Bills game. So if anything happens in the Bills game that's completely shocking, good or bad, and I don't think it will be bad, there you go. There we've made that disclaimer. However, regardless of that, I wanted to talk about these two guys because it's a little bit about these two guys. We've talked a lot about them, but it's more this philosophy because I think it's interesting. You've got the guy in Frazier that at one point, and I think he will prove through his career that he was worthy of being, even if it was the back end being a first-round draft pick that the Steelers got in a second. And then you've got a guy that was like a top 3-round draft pick, right? So, at a minimum. And then you've got like a bit of the polar opposite of a Beanie Bishop, where some people had him between the 4th and the 7th round. Other people had him as an undrafted guy. I had him in like the 5th or 6th because I thought that a lot of people would sleep on him. And then he goes undrafted of all things, and the Steelers pick him up. So I'm not going to call them polar opposites because Beanie Bishop still had a draftable grade on him, but it's a kind of a tale of two different stories if you look at it from a draft process or how they've made this Steelers team and put themselves in the mix to actually be starters, even in Beanie Bishop's case. But what is definitely common is, I guess, they've come from not just that they've come from the same college, but they've come from a similar mindset and work ethic and in how they've developed as players. And obviously, West Virginia is very close to your heart because it's in your heart. You live in West Virginia. But the bigger takeaway for me is about is how the Steelers select it. And I'll shut up in a moment because you're better to talk to this. But it's not just about how the Steelers are going about selecting players, but how you go and find players and scout players because they knew about Frazier. Like Waddle talked about this in his interview. They saw him in a pit game, right? Beanie Bishop, you said when we did the segment on the versatility on the defense, being from that perspective, and whether that's out or not before this, we'll see. But when we talked about that in our recording of content this week, you also you talked about Beanie Bishop being a developed starter and that maturity that he brings in that role. So I guess I wanted to sort of pick your brain a little bit on like how you go about finding players, and particularly because like the college season's about to kick off, right? So who are the guys, and everyone will start their top 10 and their first round guys, whatever. And this is the time when I start who are the guys that, in my own head, who are the guys that no one's talking about that I just need to see develop through the season. But that can be very based on what we see on a field and statistics only. But there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes, obviously, for those players to develop. So I want to pick your brain on like what are those things people need to look for? What are those things they need to keep in mind? Because there also might be guys that make this Steelers roster that we all sit there and we go, well, who the hell's that guy, right? But they might have some of these intangibles or character qualities or capabilities, traits, attributes, whatever words we want to use. That make them the right fit for the team.
Well, I'm going to start with Zach Frazier. And the reason why is because, everybody knows how excited that I was and how badly I wanted him to be drafted by the Steelers. I don't watch as much college football as you do and some of our community members and Andrew Wilbar. And I have to lean on you guys a lot of times. If it's somebody that plays West Virginia and they're in the Big 12, or I get to catch a good bit of SEC games or ACC, and I'll look for guys that, especially in certain positions, that I know the Steelers could be looking for in the draft. But I was so familiar about Frazier and Beanie, of course, because that they were Mountaineers. But when the Steelers had the opportunity to draft Creed Humphrey, I grew up watching Mike Webster. Now, Mike Webster had a long, long career. The fact that, he was very young when I was a kid, very young when he was drafted. But I seen him develop, and enough that I knew. I used to remember watching Webster, and he'd come off and he'd be bloody, and his knuckles would be bloody, and he'd be muddy, and he'd look like he was barely making it on the sidelines, and taking him a drink, and then the defense would get the ball back real quick, and he'd have to put that helmet back on and go back out there. And I said, he's hurt. And they'd be, no, he's okay. He's okay. He's okay. That's just that's how he looks all the time. Because of how he had to play. But, he was like 6'1" and 260 something.
Yeah, that's crazy.
This guy's much bigger. And he would slam his head into their sternum to block them to get that early leverage. And he did that repeatedly for many years. And that's where the CTE. So his impact on football is not just the greatest center of all time, but it was that he made the biggest through his death is going to save so many young men from having that similar fate, because he's the one that really brought CTE to light.
Yeah.
And so his greatness is just the greatest center I ever seen. And it'll take a lot for me to ever change my mind. But when I see Frazier as a freshman at West Virginia, I kept getting flashbacks. Now, Frazier he was a workout warrior. He stayed in the weight room, and he got to where he had tree trunks legs for arms. If you look at Frazier, he is just so stout, and he's so, he's not the tallest, he's not the fastest, but the guy's got the heart of a lion, and he just battles on every play. And he's so technically strong, and he has such great leverage from his wrestling background. But he's also so determined not to fail. Anything he's done, he's excelled at. Whether it's in the classroom, whether it was in his charity stuff, whether it was in his football. He won it for the hardest worker on the football team. All these different things. Frazier, I wanted Creed Humphrey.
I know.
And the best center that I ever evaluated, and I said it leading up to that draft, I said it was Creed Humphrey. And I know different people that I respect that had him in the top 2 that year, but they all said, he's really good. I thought he was, because he had a mentality, because center is different than any other offensive line position. And there has to be that intelligence and that leadership. That it's more than just.
And Fields has talked about that with Frazier already. He's I'll go to the line and say we need to flip. We need to flip it, and it's like Frazier's already done it. Like,
and you can guarantee if he has something he struggled, and any rookie will, he will be obsessed with turning that weakness into a strength. That's his mentality. So I know he won't fail, because that's just not in his vocabulary. He will do whatever it takes to excel. So when he come in and the Steelers were able to get him, I said, wait till you see his footwork, his fundamentals, his leverage, his technique. We seen that in the first preseason game. Now I'm not at the camp, so I can't see why is he running second string to Nate Herbig, who is not even an NFL caliber center. Maybe offensive line if you put him at guard, but he's not a center. I mean, if that's the case, that whoever was playing Mason Cole last year and Herbig was an option, they should be fired. But so now you go and you draft the most plug and play.
And it could just be trying to get the most out of Frazier.
Well, they're doing that. And it's kind of that, smoke and mirrors, earn your position crap. But I'm just saying that Frazier is light years ahead as a prospect and as a player that Herbig ever will be. But Herbig's been a good mentor, they say. And he's really been there for Frazier and helping him, even though he knows Frazier's taking that job. He's helping Frazier. So I'm not against Herbig, because that shows a lot of maturity. That shows being a great teammate. It shows a lot of character, as we see with Mason Rudolph last year or years. People like that. You need those people on a team that helps the younger guys. But Frazier comes in the game, and instantly you seen him get off his punch, his turn, the way he would just ease in just effortlessly to get that gap, and then he had the power to move these guys and turn them. Even if he couldn't move them, he turned them. Now, one time he took a bull rush, but if you watch, he kept his balance and he just turned the guy. So where the guy did push him back, but he couldn't get into the play because he stayed on his block. He didn't get off balance or knocked to the ground. He pancaked guys. And when he had an opportunity, he took him down and he jumped on him. He didn't let him get back into play. I just think that Frazier is the next legacy center. I don't want to rush him. I don't want to, but you're not rushing him. He is so mature.
Oh, yeah.
Both as an individual, he's married, he's got a child. He's a very mature gentleman who is ready for this. He's been groomed for this now for 3 or 4 years. And I expect him to have a wonderful season as a rookie. Beanie Bishop, I had him as a 4th round grade, if you remember.
Yep.
At the draft, I said I would actually spend a 4th rounder on him because they didn't have a 5th. Because I was afraid he wouldn't make it to the 6th. And then to go and draft it. Now, they said they discussed with him that he was their priority free agent. And they stayed in contact with him all the way through. And luckily, the other teams didn't pull the trigger on him. But I told y'all before the draft that he is 24 years old. I've seen guys go play baseball, let's say, and then come back and play 1 year college football and get drafted 24, 25. Chris Winkie, I think, was 27. The quarterback for Florida State back in the day. But that's what held Beanie Bishop from being drafted. It wasn't his athleticism. He ran a 4.39. He's got really good strength and all for his size, but his age.
Yeah.
But it was a slow progress. He matured every year, and it all come together in West Virginia. And he was an All-American. He never backed off from any challenge. There was games West Virginia got beat handily. And I would watch the effort level. And you would see some guys, like, oh, well, the play's on that side of the field. They didn't even run over. Every down, every snap that he was out there, he was giving everything he had.
Yeah.
And I said, I remember telling my family, I said, that mentality will get him in the NFL. And he will be successful. Because yes, he's undersized to be full-time on the outside. But so was Darrell Green. So was other guys. If you've got the dog in you and that effort level and that athleticism, and he has all that. Now, I think he's going to be a great slot.
But it's a good example. What I'll say is a good example is like Asante Samuel Jr. plays free safety for the Chargers, right? He's not like
he's not big.
He's not big at all.
No.
Right. And I sit there.
But he plays bigger.
And like I think we put a little bit into that sometimes. I think there are certain positions like, I'll sit there and talk about Miko Pruitt. I don't think he's, really big enough and not really a tight end. He's an H-back. And, we'll talk about the height of different blokes and all the rest of it. But, like, at the end of the day, it's how you play on the field. Like, you and I have talked about it with the whole 4.4 to 4.6 thing with 40-yard times. I mean, Cooper Kupp runs I think it was a 4.63 or something, and, and his 40-yard time. Well, the bloke, has basically won MVP effectively, having the most yards, right? And there's guys out there like, what's John Ross ever done? We can go through heaps of guys that are complete freak speedsters, and they haven't had that production. So sometimes you've just got to go, you know what? Like, this player is a little bit of an outlier, and that is what it is. Like,
I don't know if you've seen that. Was it Graylin Arnold?
Yes, and he's been
who got injured, regrettably, because I think he was going to have a shot at making the team, but he got hurt. But because he looked pretty good in the preseason game. Yep. But somebody was saying, well, they're playing him with the first string Beanie. They must not be happy. I don't read it that way. I believe that Beanie, they're happy. They know what they got in Beanie. Remember, Mike Tomlin mentioned him, and then Andy Weidel in his press conference talked about how Beanie fits what they were looking for, and that they were so glad they got him, and and what a great deal of value he is. I think they know what they got, so they were seeing what else they had. But Beanie Bishop, I believe, is going to be a major contributor this year. And I think that the fans are going to love him because it's like watching Mike Hilton again with more athleticism and more speed. But they have that underdog
and maybe a bit
chip
more
on my shoulder mentality.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe with a bit more physicality. Like we actually have a saying for it here. I don't think it's ever come up when we've done shows. And you guys call it like dog, but we like call it you've got to have a bit of mongrel in you.
No, mongrel's a dog here.
Yeah. That's what we call it here.
Yeah,
I like it's a bit more, and it's not just dog though. It's like extra scrappy and like just
extra
a bit of,
scrappy,
but also
yeah.
a bit like how to put this, like really hard nosed, right? Like you almost be willing to bend the rules effectively, but you just stay on the right, like the right side of the line on that.
I know it's the same in rugby, even though I never got to play rugby.
Yeah.
But when you play against somebody in any sport and the contest is just starting, whether it's a team sport, individual sport, whatever, and you're going up against them and you realize, this is going to be a long day.
Yep.
I think I'm more talented, I'm bigger, I'm faster, I'm stronger, but that guy's going to be a pain in my rear all day long. You know this. And you know, and you don't look forward to those matchups. You don't look forward to it because they wear you out. It's just you have to give maximum effort. If you are better, you got to give maximum effort to show you're better.
Yeah.
And they put pressure on you. And it's just it's a competition. And that's what Beanie Bishop is. Regardless of who he's going up against, they know it's going to be a long day.
Yeah, I know what that's like. I've been that sort of that scrappy player. That's it's definitely but also like you know, in physical sports, I'll say this, and you see it. You probably see it more in rugby than you do it at the NFL level. Well, no, I guess like pro and at a pro rugby level, it's a bit more even. But I think as you come up through the ranks, there's actually quite a bit of a size difference. Like there's a fun thing like when you start playing rugby. One of the first things they tell you is there's a position for everyone, no matter what size you are, no matter whether you're slow or you're fast, and so there's a lot of positions where like you know a lot of people you'll start out in one position, and by the time you finish, whether you finish at the end of high school or you finish when you're in college, or whether people that played pro, and you go back to what position they played, it's like, what the heck? Like I don't even know I did that, right? Like, as I grew, but like as I lost like what we call like the puppy fat and all of that, and ended up effectively going from like offensive defensive line to being like linebacker tight end like kind of thing, like like but like really fast and strong safety kind of thing. So it's so hard to compare them though, because obviously you play both sides of the ball, in rugby. But it's kind of a really interesting thing. But one of the things that we'd always say is that, like, particularly when you play bigger guys, obviously we have a lot of people from like Polynesian backgrounds, and same as obviously in the States. But one of the things we always used to be told is like, they're like, it doesn't matter how big you are, right? Like, it's that whole fight the size of the dog. But like, they're like, if you're a bloke and everyone's a human, and if you put someone on their behind at the start of a game, particularly the biggest guy on the field, you won't hear about him for the rest of the day, right? And no matter how, and no matter how big they are. And you know what? You used to sit there in the coaching and you'd like say it and you go, oh yeah, whatever. Particularly, you're a teenager and you think you know better. But I'd say some of those games, it's like you said, when you kick off and you look at the other team and you're like, this is going to be a long day. But there are a couple of times where you're like, I remember being in the spot, because essentially we'll talk about this because the kickoff rules, right?
Yeah.
Like in the NFL. But in this, like you kick off, and we used to pretty much like, there's no real rule other than it's got to go more than in measurements. So it's got to go more than 10 meters, the ball, right? And then apart from that, you can't kick it out. It's like NFL. You can't kick it out on the full off a kickoff. That's not allowed to. You can't do that. Well, I mean, actually, technically, you can, but you'll actually, the ball will be brought back exactly to where the spot you kicked it from. So there's no point doing it. Like, that's a stupid thing to do. But yeah, we'd have it. So, but I always played the position where my key role always was the gunner, right? Right. My job was to make that first tackle, or to be the guy that makes second tackle. What we used to do is, because unlike in the NFL, obviously you split it offense, defense. Well, in rugby, we split it as forwards and backs. So forwards are the ones that are in the scrum and in the line out when they throw the ball in, and then you have the backs as like as the wider guys. That's the way it's split. So the whole idea was, if you're playing a team that you knew had crappy backs, you'd kick the ball to the backs, you'd send the forwards in, and you try and crash tackle them, get a turnover. But if they were a team that had really good backs, you'd kick it to the forwards, and you try and slow everything right down, and you'd be kicking off them in their side of the field. So the idea was that you'd slow them down. They'd be forced to, because obviously in rugby you don't just wait for the 4 downs. You sometimes kick it way before that, and move the ball. But I remember there'd be a couple of times where like someone had missed that first tackle, and there'd be a couple of games you'd be like, you know what, like we'll just ease in as we go. And then someone had missed that first tackle, and next thing I know, I've got the guy coming at me in an angle I don't know. And then you put that first tackle on, and the reason why I'm bringing this, I know it's a long way to get there, but you put that first tackle on, and then I was always the thing that I was one of those players where I just needed to make that first tackle. I needed that. And then after that, I was good to go. But it was always like, needed to get that.
Oh, yeah.
And it was, and we did the things I've seen in NFL rooms as well, where people like, shove your shoulders and all that, like in the change rooms and, or in the locker room before the game. That did nothing for me. Like, I just used to sit, I'm like, I need the adrenaline of like
the real
bone on bone. And remember, we don't wear pads and we don't wear helmets, right? Like, I needed another bloke running into me at full speed to like, be like, okay, cool, we're doing this now.
Yeah, that, like you said, set the tone. And you guys, a lot of times if a guy like a Beanie Bishop comes in and, really nails a guy, makes the big hit, the big play, or whoever, Peyton Wilson, Patrick Queen, that sets the tone for everybody.
Yeah.
Because hey, we're playing ball. Nothing else. You ain't thinking about nothing else. Just, winning this game and winning your matchup. And so, yeah, the Steelers got some tone setters now.
And because there's that famous Mike Tyson saying, which actually comes off the back of a German general that said something, slightly more toned down, which is like, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth, right?
Yes.
And I think that's a really good way of thinking about the Steelers defense, because, and particularly some of these players that the team have brought in on offense and defense, is you've got players that like are going to punch people in the mouth. They're going to make an impact, and how are you going to react? So yeah, pretty exciting. But look, that's going to wrap up all this week's content of the Steelers Global Perspective. Join us for more as we continue into the NFL regular season. I'm Matty P with Shannon White. As always, go Steelers.